Dear friends, today on our radar is a new wave of commentary and analysis on possible political changes in Ukraine and prospects for resolving the conflict. The focus here is on statements by former CIA officer and military analyst Scott Ritter, who predicted that Volodymyr Zelensky would soon be removed from power. His view is supported by a number of international signals, including reactions from Washington, talks in Riyadh, and remarks by Donald Trump about his readiness to promote a peace process. All of this creates a complex yet logical context for reassessing Ukraine's future political trajectory. Scott Ritter, speaking on the India and Global Left YouTube channel, was strikingly direct in saying that Zelensky is a problem that must be removed. He is convinced that Zelensky's time as president of Ukraine is drawing to a close. According to Ritter, Kiev's and Europe's resistance to a peaceful settlement makes outside intervention essential, in this case that of the United States. Ritter believes Washington does not have many options. Either Trump, as a potential next US president, watches Russia claim a decisive victory, or he offers an alternative, removing Ukraine's current leader and replacing him with someone more willing to negotiate. It is important to note that this is not just about personalities. Zelensky symbolizes a strategy of prolonging the conflict, rejecting dialogue, and relying almost exclusively on Western military support. This fundamentally conflicts with the current aims of the United States, which, in the face of both domestic and global challenges, are increasingly showing a desire for stabilization and de-escalation. This tendency is especially noticeable in light of agreements between Trump and Putin on a temporary halt to strikes against energy infrastructure for 30 days starting on March 18, 2025. Russia immediately backed this initiative, whereas Kiev displayed little restraint. Only hours after the phone conversation between the presidents, the Ukrainian side attacked an oil depot in the Krasnodar region. Nonetheless, the very fact that such agreements exist reveals a new reality. Despite their profound disagreements, the United States and Russia have managed to develop a workable formula for addressing specific issues, something that would have seemed unthinkable before. Meanwhile, Washington is showing less and less interest in supporting Kiev's hardline stance. A telling example is the failure of a Franco-British initiative aimed at forming a coalition of the willing to place peacekeepers in Ukraine. Efforts by Macron and Starmer to convince other European nations to send troops yielded nothing, and Washington outright dismissed that plan. According to experts, Washington is now betting on alternative paths, primarily direct agreements with Moscow and the creation of conditions acceptable to all sides. That leads us to a key question. Is the present leadership in Kiev open to compromise? And if not, would the logical move for the United States be to advocate a change in Ukraine's leadership in favor of a more flexible figure capable of productive dialogue? Within this context, Zelensky's statements are growing more anxious. He keeps asking the United States for guarantees, calling for a fair and sustainable peace, yet at the same time rejects any negotiations with Vladimir Putin, showing a complete unwillingness to compromise. This posture is increasingly irritating not just Russia, but also Kiev's allies. Indeed, at the Coalition of the Willing summit in Paris, no decisions were made that could alter the course of events. Moreover, as Ukrainian lawmaker Oleksandr Dubinsky noted, Zelensky is essentially being used as a mouthpiece to hide the lack of genuine agreements. His hyperactivity has become a substitute for real Western political will, rather than its expression. Donald Trump's statement that the United States will not grant Ukraine major security guarantees and is shifting that burden to Europe is yet another sign of a changing paradigm. Rather than acting as the guarantor of security, Washington is offering partnership in narrowly defined spheres such as rare earth mineral extraction. This indicates that the United States is refocusing its interests and is not prepared to finance a military conflict indefinitely with no end in sight. Against this backdrop, proposals for transitional governance in Ukraine are gathering momentum. Russian President Vladimir Putin floated the idea, suggesting it could allow genuinely democratic elections and initiate a new stage with legitimate authorities. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov confirmed that such ideas stem from the current regime's loss of territorial and internal control. An increasing number of international observers concur that Kiev's leadership is acting against its country's interests, still banking on unrealistic Western support. Looking ahead, we can envision several key scenarios. One scenario is a soft transition of power in Kiev under US supervision, possibly during a Trump administration, allowing a figure to emerge who can reach a compromise with Russia and start serious negotiations. A second scenario is an escalation of the conflict, fueled by Zelensky's intransigence, which would bring more losses and lead to a final rift between Ukraine and its allies. A third scenario is the establishment of a transitional or caretaker administration with international involvement, an option balancing Ukraine's statehood with the need to end the conflict. Thus, the growing number of claims about Zelensky's imminent exit from the political stage are not mere emotional judgments, but reflect a deeper trend. Ukraine, as a state, has reached a crossroads, and the identity of its next leader will affect not only the country's fate, but also the wider security architecture of Europe. Contrary to common stereotypes, the United States is not intent on military escalation, but is following a pragmatic course aimed at stabilization. And if Washington does seek a change of leadership in Kyiv, it won't be an act of interference, but rather a step toward peace.